Welcome to Skin Hero. Here's the story.
3 years ago, my brother and I went camping. We chose a remote forest far from any official sites. The ranger warned us that people sometimes got lost there. He said trails faded fast once you stepped off them. We laughed, said we had maps and charged phones ready. The first day felt perfect, quiet and strangely peaceful. Tall trees blocked most sunlight, leaving everything in soft shadow. We followed the main trail until it almost disappeared. By evening, we found a small clearing near a stream. We pitched a tent, built a fire, and cooked dinner. As darkness thickened, the forest around us grew extremely quiet. Crickets stopped, wind died, and even the stream sounded muffled. The air felt heavier, like the trees leaned closer together. We talked softer without really knowing why we whispered. Around midnight, we put more wood on the fire carefully. At some point, one heard my brother calling from the trees. He sounded annoyed, like he tripped over something in darkness. His voice came clearly from somewhere behind the tent. I turned and called back, asking if he was okay. He did not answer, but I heard branches snapping farther. I grabbed a flashlight and walked several meters into darkness. The beam cut through mist, drifting low between tree trunks. I called his name again, louder than before, heart racing. His voice answered from even deeper inside the forest. "Come here, you need to see this," he shouted. Something felt wrong in the way he said those words. His tone was right, yet the rhythm sounded slightly off. He always swore when excited, but now he did not. I stopped walking, suddenly very aware of surrounding silence. The forest swallowed my breathing like thick, heavy fabric. Behind me, fabric rustled inside the tent near the fire. I turned and saw my brother unzipping the entrance slowly. He stepped out, sleepy, holding his blanket around his shoulders. He asked why I was yelling his name repeatedly. My legs went weak when I realized he was inside. The voice from the trees called again, same exact sound, same pitch, same tone, identical to my brother speaking. "Come on, stop messing around, just follow the sound." Hearing his voice while he stood beside me felt impossible. He stared into the trees, face draining of color completely. The voice repeated his favorite insult, something very specific. It was a phrase he used constantly during jokes with friends, but he had not used it all day around me. I watched his mouth stay closed while the words echoed. The sound moved slowly, circling us from different directions. Sometimes it came from the stream, sometimes uphill behind rocks. The distance shifted, but the volume stayed almost identical. It never sounded farther, only sideways, as if walking around. We backed closer to the fire, gripping our flashlights tightly. Neither of us spoke, afraid of encouraging whatever copied him. The voice started laughing, almost perfectly copying his usual laugh. But certain notes stretched too long, as if testing it. The laugh went on far longer than any normal person. Then it stopped instantly, replaced by complete heavy silence again. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. We fed the fire until flames burned high and bright. Red light pushed back the darkness, but not very far. Just beyond the tree line, something moved between trunks. We saw no shape, only branches slowly parting, then returning. Leaves rustled without wind, circling us in wide arcs. Occasionally the voice called again, always using his exact sound. Sometimes it sounded closer than before, just outside firelight. Each time we pointed our flashlights, the trees stood still. No animals, no person, nothing that could speak back. only that perfect imitation fading and returning from different angles. We did not sleep, waiting for sunrise like trapped animals. By morning, the forest looked harmless, almost friendly and calm. Birds sang, light cut through the branches. Everything felt normal. We broke camp quickly, barely speaking while packing our gear. On the way back, the main trail looked different somehow. New branches lay across it, and certain turns felt unfamiliar. Several times we realized we were walking in quiet circles. Eventually, we found a faded marker and followed it out. At the ranger station, we told a softened version carefully. He listened without smiling and asked several specific questions. "Did it sound exactly like you or slightly wrong?" he asked. My brother answered that it sounded right until laughing started. The ranger nodded like he heard that description many times. He said some people reported voices trying to lure them deeper. He called it the echo thing and avoided naming anything else. He told us to leave the forest before night returned. We obeyed without argument, driving away faster than usual. Since then, whenever my brother calls my name from another room, I always check that I can actually see his face.
Second story.
Two friends and I went hiking near an old ridgeline. The trail was narrow, steep, and mostly forgotten by tourists. Trees leaned over the path, blocking sunlight in strange patches. We planned a simple day trip with lunch near the summit. None of us expected anything unusual in that quiet forest. Halfway up the hill, the air grew noticeably colder suddenly. Fog drifted between the trees, moving slower than normal fog. We joked about horror movies, trying to hide growing discomfort. The higher we climbed, the quieter the forest seemed becoming. Even birds stopped calling, leaving everything strangely hollow sounding. When we reached the ridgeline, the fog thinned slightly around us. A wide open space stretched across the top of the hill. From there we could see the valley and distant treetops. We dropped our bags, drank water, and rested on a fallen log. Everything felt peaceful until I looked toward the far ridge. A tall, dark figure stood on the opposite slope, completely still, not moving, not shifting, just standing upright, facing our direction. I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone enjoying the view. But no one else was supposed to be on this forgotten trail. My friends saw it too and fell silent almost immediately. It stood too far to recognize any details or expression, but something looked wrong in its posture and overall shape. It was slightly hunched, like its neck bent at an angle. The figure never adjusted position, even when fog passed through. Most people shift weight occasionally, but this one never moved. We watched for nearly a full minute, waiting for movement. Nothing happened, no gesture, no visible breathing, no walking. Then one friend shouted a greeting across the ridgeline loudly. His voice echoed strangely, bouncing off trees in unnatural patterns. The figure did not react, not even a slight turn. Fog thickened suddenly, rolling across the slope like heavy smoke. We lost sight of the figure for a brief moment completely. When the fog thinned again, the figure stood noticeably closer. Still far away, but much closer than it should be realistically. We hadn't heard footsteps or any movement between those positions. My friend whispered that someone might be watching us intentionally. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like being observed closely. We decided to pack our things and leave the ridgeline immediately. Before stepping back onto the trail, I glanced toward the slope. The figure stood even closer now, halfway up the hill. It felt like watching a predator measure distance between prey silently. We walked faster than usual, trying not to show growing terror. Every few minutes I looked back, hoping it disappeared completely finally. But each time it appeared somewhere different along the slope, always standing still, always closer than expected, always watching. At one point the trail curved tightly around a rocky outcrop. The trees grew denser, blocking our view of the ridgeline behind. When I checked again, the figure stood between two thick pines, closer than ever, only 100 meters behind the trail. Its shape looked clearer now, tall, thin, and slightly distorted. We didn't speak, didn't stop, didn't look too long. Something about its stillness felt worse than any movement possible. My friend whispered that it might not want to be seen, but I felt the opposite, like it wanted us watching constantly. It stood perfectly straight now, no more hunch and posture. Fog spilled down the trail again, hiding everything for seconds. In that moment we heard branches snapping somewhere behind us. Not heavy steps, but a slow, deliberate pressure on wood. We didn't turn around, afraid of seeing it too close. Our pace quickened until we were almost running downhill together. When the trail finally reached lower ground, fog disappeared completely. Birds returned, insects buzzed, and normal forest sounds surrounded us. We felt safer but didn't stop moving until reaching our car. Before leaving, I looked back toward the ridgeline one last time. No figure stood there, only empty trees blowing in wind. That evening, my friend checked photos he took on the ridgeline. In two of them, a dark shape stood behind distant trees. In the third photo, the shape appeared slightly closer somehow, but none of us remembered seeing it move at any moment. Since that day, I avoid ridgelines where visibility feels too open, and I never trust fog when it moves like something alive.
That story.
Last spring, two friends and I camped deep in a forest. The trail was long, muddy, and rarely used by hikers. The trees grew so closely that sunlight barely reached ground. We set our tents near a dead, fallen pine trunk. By sunset, the forest became silent in a strangely heavy way. We cooked dinner, talked, and watched the fire burn slowly. Nothing unusual happened during the first half of the night. Around midnight, we crawled into our tents and tried sleeping. Wind moved through branches softly, creating comforting natural sounds. Eventually, everyone drifted off, except me lying awake listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard faint footsteps approaching our campsite. Slow, careful steps like someone trying not to be noticed. I opened my eyes but didn't move my body yet. The footsteps stopped directly outside my tent near the entrance. I held my breath, waiting for another sound to confirm danger. A hand pressed against the tent fabric near my shoulder. Not an animal paw, a clear human-shaped hand with fingers. The pressure slid downward, feeling the outside surface slowly. The hand moved to the zipper and pinched the pull. I heard the teeth separating, one click at a time softly. I whispered my friend's name, hoping he was messing around. No answer came, only the slow, steady sound of unzipping. The zipper moved halfway before someone outside suddenly stopped. Breathing came through the opening, long and slow and controlled. It sounded like someone smelling the inside of my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on instantly. The beam hit the entrance, illuminating nothing but shaking fabric. No face, no hand, no shadow, just the moving door. Whatever stood outside had pulled away the moment light appeared. I unzipped the door fully and shined the flashlight outward carefully. The ground showed clear footprints circling all 3 tents. Barefoot prints, long, narrow, and pressed unusually deep into earth. They weren't ours. We all wore boots the entire trip. I woke my friends and told them everything in seconds. They stepped out, confused and terrified, scanning the dark tree line. More footprints appeared near the pine trunk behind our tents. Some prints overlapped, showing someone walked circles repeatedly. We listened for movement but heard nothing except light wind. The air felt colder than before, colder than normal nighttime. My friend suggested someone watched us for a long time. We decided to keep all flashlights on and stay outside. None of us wanted to go back into tents anymore. For nearly 20 minutes, the forest stayed perfectly silent. Then a branch snapped somewhere beyond our fire's glow. Not a small twig, something heavy stepped on wood. The footsteps began again, circling somewhere between thick trees. Slow, confident steps, keeping distance but always moving around us. Each time we pointed a flashlight, the sound shifted direction. It stayed out of sight, but always remained near enough. We stood in a tight group, watching every shadow carefully. Suddenly the noises stopped completely, leaving dead silence everywhere. The forest felt like it held its breath, waiting again. We didn't speak, didn't move, didn't lower our flashlights even once. Then we noticed a detail that made everything worse instantly. A fresh footprint pressed into dirt only a meter behind us. Someone had been much closer than footsteps suggested earlier. Close enough to reach any of us without making noise. We backed toward the trailhead slowly, keeping lights toward trees. The forest remained silent, offering no explanation or movement. When we finally reached open ground, we ran without stopping. At sunrise, we returned with a ranger from the nearby station. He examined the prints, frowned, and knelt to measure them. He said similar footprints appeared many times near remote campsites. He warned that someone wandered these woods at night often. Someone who never spoke, never approached, only watched quietly. Since then, I refused to sleep in forests without locked cabins, and I never trust the sound of footsteps behind thin fabric.
Story 4.
2 years ago, my cousin and I explored an old forest. We wanted a long hike with no marked trails anywhere. The deeper we went, the quieter the woods became gradually. Even our footsteps sounded muted, like the ground absorbed noise. We walked for hours until the trail finally disappeared entirely. Around late afternoon, we noticed something strange through the trees. A wooden cabin stood deep in the forest, half hidden. It didn't look ruined, but it looked extremely old. The roof leaned slightly, and the windows were boarded unevenly. No smoke, no tools, no path leading toward its entrance. My cousin said someone might still live out there quietly, but everything about the cabin felt abandoned and strangely untouched. We circled it from a distance, keeping ourselves well hidden. The boards on the windows looked recently nailed in place. Some wood was old, but some pieces looked surprisingly fresh. There were footprints around the cabin, but only single ones. Not 2 sets, just one person walking in repeated circles. Long, narrow steps tracked around the entire structure deliberately. Some prints were old, while others looked newly made. Whatever lived there paced the perimeter often and methodically. We agreed not to approach it and continued deeper instead. The forest around us grew darker even before the sunset. Trees leaned inward more sharply, making the path feel claustrophobic. Eventually, we decided to turn back before losing light completely. But when we returned to the clearing, the cabin looked different. A candle flickered dimly behind one of the boarded windows. The wood wasn't removed, the light simply leaked through cracks. No smoke came from inside, just a faint yellow glow. My cousin whispered that someone watched us earlier from inside. A chill ran down my back as I stared silently. We backed away slowly, trying not to break branches loudly. The entire forest felt like it pressed against our shoulders. When we reached a safe distance, we turned and walked faster. About 10 minutes later, we heard soft footsteps behind us. Not running, not stumbling, careful footsteps matching our pace. We didn't speak, didn't turn around, just kept walking. The footsteps stayed exactly 10 to 15 meters behind us. Each time we slowed, they slowed with identical timing. Each time we quickened, they quickened the same amount. It felt like someone followed us confidently without hiding. When we finally reached a ridge, the footsteps suddenly stopped. Silence spread across the entire forest like a thick blanket. We waited, listening, expecting movement or breathing behind trees. Nothing came, no sound, no shadow, no breaking branch. We moved again, hoping the follower returned to the cabin. 40 minutes later, we reached a river crossing near a cliffside. We stopped to drink water and catch our breath slightly. As I bent down, I noticed something across the river. A figure stood behind a tree on the opposite bank, tall, thin, unmoving, facing us with a rigid posture. My cousin whispered that the cabin owner followed us silently, but the figure never moved, never shifted, never stepped closer. It stood perfectly still as if carved from wood itself. We crossed the river carefully and ran up the next slope. Neither of us wanted to see if it followed again. When we finally reached the forest edge, night had fallen. The last thing we heard was a faint knocking sound. Not on a door, on wood from somewhere behind us. Slow, deliberate knocks, spaced evenly like a practiced signal. We didn't look back and sprinted toward the road immediately. A week later, we returned with a ranger to report everything. He checked the old maps and shook his head slowly. No cabin exists in that part of the forest, he said. He insisted no structures were allowed within that protected area. When we showed him the exact location, he looked uncomfortable. He said several hikers reported a cabin that never stayed consistent. Sometimes it appeared abandoned, other times freshly maintained inside. Sometimes it had boarded windows, other times open ones visible. No ranger ever found it, despite multiple search attempts. He warned us never to follow unknown structures deeper again. I still dream of that dim light leaking between the boards, and sometimes I hear those slow knocks when forests grow quiet.
Story 5.
2 summers ago, my girlfriend and I camped near a lake. The forest around it was dense, quiet, and strangely peaceful. The water was completely still, reflecting trees like a mirror. We set our tent near the shoreline under several leaning pines. Everything felt safe until the sun dropped behind the ridge. At dusk, the forest dimmed faster than we expected that evening. Shadows stretched long across the ground, merging into each other. We built a small fire and cooked a simple dinner together. The night air smelled like wet bark and cold moss everywhere. By midnight, the entire forest went silent in an unnatural way. We decided to walk a short trail circling the lake's edge. Our flashlights cut small tunnels through the thick surrounding darkness. Everything looked calm until we reached a bend in the trail. Across the lake, something reflected our lights back immediately. Two bright points glowed through the trees like small yellow lanterns. At first I thought they were animal eyes watching from distance, but they didn't blink, shift, lower, or change angle. They stayed fixed exactly on us, unmoving in complete stillness. My girlfriend whispered to keep walking without staring too long. We turned away, but the lights followed our movement precisely. When we moved left, they drifted left behind tree branches. When we stepped right, they slid right the same speed. Not fast, not aggressive, just perfectly synchronized tracking. No animal moved that smoothly without breaking branches or slipping. Even owls blinked, shifted, or changed elevation when curious. We hurried back toward camp, trying not to seem panicked. But every few steps we glanced back toward the opposite trees. The eyes remained visible, exactly at head height, hovering steadily. They followed us around the curve of the lake path, always keeping the same distance, never approaching or retreating. When we reached camp, our fire was nearly burned out. We threw more wood on it quickly, raising the flames higher. As the light expanded, I looked across the lake again. The glowing eyes stood closer than before, near the shoreline. Still motionless, still watching us without blinking even once. I grabbed a lantern and shined it across the dark water. The beam reached the opposite bank, but revealed absolutely nothing. Trees, rocks, bushes, everything looked normal and undisturbed. But when I lowered the lantern, the eyes reappeared instantly again, like they only existed where bright light couldn't fully reach. We stayed near the fire, unable to look away anymore. My girlfriend said she felt pressure on her chest suddenly. I felt the same, like the forest held its breath tightly. Then the eyes began to rise slowly upward into branches. They lifted several feet as though standing on impossibly tall legs. No animal in that forest could move upward that smoothly. No climbing sound, no shifting branches, no scraping bark occurred. Just silent elevation, like drifting instead of climbing naturally. Then the eyes dimmed for a moment, almost disappearing completely. When they brightened again, they were much closer to our side. We backed away from the shoreline, gripping our flashlights hard. Something moved behind the trees, a shape we couldn't identify. Not tall, not short, just a shifting mass without clear outline. The glowing eyes hovered slightly ahead of it, leading movement. It felt like it tried to understand our reactions cautiously. Suddenly, a branch snapped loudly somewhere near our tent. We spun around, hearts racing, expecting something right behind us. But nothing stood there, only motionless pines in complete silence. When we turned back toward the lake, the eyes were gone. No glow, no movement, nothing but black water and trees. We threw everything into our car and left immediately. Driving down the dirt road, we felt watched constantly behind us. At the final turn before the forest ended, I looked back. Two faint yellow lights hovered between distant trees, following slowly. Then they faded completely as we crossed into open road. I never returned to that lake or anywhere near it. And sometimes in dark places I still see those eyes again. Thank you for listening to this story. If anything like this ever happened to you in the forest, tell me in the comments. Your experience might help someone feel less alone out there. Your like and your comment help this channel grow in the dark. And if you want more true horror every week, make sure you subscribe. If you haven't seen the previous video yet, 5 True Childhood Scary Memories, watch it next. One of the stories might stay with you longer than you expect. Stay safe tonight.